Rest of your life, you will never be eligible for parole.
A baby is dying on a hospital table in Blackpool. His name is Preston. He is just 13 months old. Doctors and nurses are fighting to save his life. His heart has stopped. The man who brought him in says it was an accident. He says Preston fell from his bath seat. He says the baby slipped under the water for just a few seconds. But something is wrong with that story. Preston is not wet. He is completely dry. And when doctors look closer, they find something no parent should ever cause. Preston's small body has almost 40 injuries. Some are old, some are new. None of them match the story. This is not a case about one bad moment. This is not a father who lost his temper one time. This is the story of two men. Two men who were chosen to give a baby a safe home. Two men who were trusted by social workers, by doctors, and by an entire adoption system. Instead, they turned that home into a place of pain. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what was done to Preston and how so many people missed the truth until it was too late. But first, I want to ask you something. Have you ever heard of a case where the perfect parents turned out to be the real monsters? Tell me in the comments, and let me know what city or country you're watching from, because what happened inside that house will leave you speechless. To understand what happened to Preston, we need to go back to the beginning of his short life. Preston was born in June 2022. At the time, his mother was serving a prison sentence at HMP style. She was allowed to care for him for a short time in the mother and baby unit inside the prison. But after just 5 days, Preston was taken away and placed with foster carers in Oldham. He stayed with those foster carers for about 9 months. During this time, Oldham Council began looking for a permanent family who could adopt him. They started a matching process, searching for the right parents to give Preston a stable and loving home. That search led them to two men, Jamie Varley and John McGowan-Fazakerley. On paper, they looked like an ideal choice. Jamie Varley was a secondary school teacher. He had even worked as a head of year, a position of responsibility and trust. John McGowan-Fazakerley worked in sales and held a senior, well-paid role. Together, they were financially stable. They owned a nice home in Blackpool. They were a settled couple who said they wanted to start a family. Before any child can be placed with adoptive parents, they must pass through strict checks. Varley and McGowan-Fazakerley went through Stage 1 screening. This included criminal record checks, financial checks, medical exams, and interviews. At every single stage, nothing raised a red flag. Nothing suggested these men could not be trusted with a child. So Preston was placed in their care. From the outside, everything about their home looked perfect. The rooms were clean and tidy. Preston had wooden toys, the kind featured in parenting magazines. He was dressed in matching outfits. Their life looked like something straight off Instagram. In fact, Jamie Varley described himself as snap happy. He documented almost every moment of Preston's life with his phone. Photos and videos of trips to the park, photos of Preston in cute outfits, photos of daily routines. To anyone scrolling through, it looked like the picture of a happy, loving family. This created what many people call a halo effect. A teacher as a dad, a financially successful partner, a beautiful home, a baby finally placed with parents who seemed to want him and could clearly provide for him. Social workers and case reviewers had every reason to feel reassured, but behind those carefully taken photos, something very different was happening. In just 4 months, Preston would live through experiences that one court reporter, someone who had covered criminal trials for almost 20 years, would later call the worst case she had ever seen. The nice home, the tidy rooms, the smiling photos, none of it was the full story. And the truth about what really happened inside that house would soon come out in ways no one expected. By this point, Preston had been living with Jamie Varley and John McGowan-Fazakerley for just under 4 months. And in that short time, something troubling was already happening. Preston had already been rushed to hospital 3 separate times. The first serious visit involved a broken elbow. This is important to understand. Preston was not yet walking on his own. Babies who cannot walk rarely break bones on their own by accident. Doctors later ruled this injury as non-accidental, meaning someone had caused it. This single injury would later become the basis for one of the criminal charges against Jamie Varley, grievous bodily harm. The other two hospital visits were different on the surface. Preston was brought in with a chest infection, but while treating him, nurses and doctors noticed something else. They saw small bruises on his head. These were not the main reason for the hospital visit, but they were noted down. Each time someone questioned an injury, Jamie Varley had an explanation ready. On one occasion, he even showed a video from his phone. It showed Preston playing with a toy box that had a bead frame on top. In the video, Preston pulls the toy box down onto himself. Varley used this as proof. He said, "He's just a clumsy baby. These are the sort of things he does." At the same time, social workers had noticed that Preston had a slight squint in one eye. This raised a separate concern. They began looking into whether this eye problem might be affecting his coordination and balance. Perhaps, they thought, this was why he kept falling and bumping into things. So, piece by piece, every bruise and every injury got a reasonable-sounding excuse. He's clumsy. He's just learning to walk. He has a coordination problem because of his eye. Nobody connected these small pieces into a bigger, darker picture. But Preston was not yet walking independently. That detail alone should have raised more questions than it did. Looking back now, we can see this clearly for what it was. A pattern of injuries, explained away one at a time, each excuse sounding just believable enough to satisfy the people asking questions. Doctors, nurses, and social workers were dealing with a baby who was quiet, who could not speak up for himself, and two adult men who always had a calm, logical answer ready. One court reporter, who has covered criminal trials for almost 20 years, later described this case as probably the worst she has ever seen. Not just because of what eventually happened to Preston, but because of how many chances there were along the way to stop it. 3 hospital visits, a broken bone, bruises on his head. Each one was a moment where someone could have asked harder questions. Each one passed by. This wasn't one missed warning sign. It was a sequence of them, one after another, each one slipping past the people who were supposed to protect him. Before we move forward, I want to ask you something. When you hear about a baby with repeated so-called accidents, fractures, bruises, and multiple trips to A&E, do you think professionals are sometimes too quick to accept a parent's explanation? Would you have suspected something was wrong here, or do you think you would have believed these 2 men, just like everyone else did? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Because what came next would prove that these were not accidents at all. The physical injuries were only part of the story. What the court saw next was something much harder to watch. It was the night before Preston's first birthday. It was already past 9 p.m. Preston was clearly exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes. Any parent watching this footage would know exactly what this baby needed. He needed to be put down in his crib and left to sleep. Instead, loud music from a Disney film was blasting in the room. Preston sat on Jamie Varley's lap, fighting to stay awake but losing the battle. His eyes began to close. His small body started to relax into sleep. Then Varley shouted at him. He did this on purpose. He wanted to startle Preston awake, and it worked. Preston jolted upright, confused and frightened. He had no idea why he was suddenly being scared like this. He simply looked lost, unsure how to react to the person who was supposed to comfort him. This was not the only time Varley did something like this. In an earlier video, Preston is at a park, sitting in one of those spinning toys. Varley spins it faster and faster, so fast that Preston's eyes roll back in his head. Anyone watching could see the baby was in distress, but Varley did not stop out of concern. He filmed it, laughing, as if it were something fun. This was a pattern: loud noises, sudden fright, being kept awake long after he should have been sleeping. To Varley, Preston's fear and confusion seemed to be a source of amusement, not something to be avoided or stopped. When this footage was shown in court, the reaction in the room was clear. Jurors tried to keep calm, controlled expressions, as jurors are expected to do. But many of them could not fully hide how deeply disturbed they were. Sadness and disgust showed on their faces as they watched. For Preston's birth mother, sitting in that courtroom, it was too much to bear. She had already lived through her own difficult past. Now she was being forced to listen to exactly what had been done to the son she was not able to raise herself. On more than one occasion, she stood up and walked out of the courtroom because she simply could not continue listening. What makes this kind of abuse so disturbing is what it reveals about control. Varley held complete power over every part of Preston's daily life. He decided when Preston slept and when he stayed awake. He decided when Preston felt safe and when he felt afraid. A loving parent uses that kind of power to comfort a child. Varley used it to frighten and unsettle him instead. And there is another disturbing detail here. Varley called himself Snap Happy. He was constantly filming and photographing Preston's life. At first, this seemed like the normal behavior of a proud, doting father. But looking back at what these videos actually captured, a different picture appears. Varley was not just documenting happy family moments. He was recording moments of Preston's fear and distress, almost as if he were creating content for his own personal, twisted satisfaction. This was not a case of a tired parent losing patience for a moment. This was calm, repeated behavior, designed to unsettle a baby who had absolutely no way to protect himself or ask for help. And this was still not the worst of what the court would learn. The physical injuries and emotional cruelty were already hard to hear about. But there was more. The evidence showed that the abuse Preston suffered was also sexual in nature. I want to be respectful here, both to Preston and to you as a viewer. I will not go into graphic detail about what was found, but it is important that you understand the seriousness of what the court was shown, because it is central to understanding this case. A post-mortem examination was carried out after Preston's death. It found injuries to his body that doctors said were consistent with forcible sexual abuse. These findings became part of the evidence used to charge Jamie Varley with sexual assault and assault by penetration. But the evidence did not stop there. Investigators found something even more disturbing on Jamie Varley's phone. He had taken photos and recorded videos of Preston that were indecent in nature. Some of this material appeared to show abuse that Varley himself was committing. He was not just harming Preston. He was documenting it, keeping a private record of what he had done. In court, Varley was convicted of multiple charges connected to this evidence, including making and distributing indecent images and videos of a child. And this abuse was not something Varley carried out alone. Both Varley and John McGowan-Fazakerley were convicted of a joint sexual assault against Preston. This assault happened just 4 days before Preston died. This detail matters because it shows McGowan-Fazakerley was not simply a passive figure standing in the background, unaware of what was happening in his own home. He was an active participant, and even in moments where he was not directly involved, he chose to look away rather than protect the child both men had brought into their home. It can be difficult to understand how something like this happens inside a family home, especially one that looked so stable and safe from the outside. But experts who study child sexual abuse point out something important. Most cases of this kind of abuse do not happen at the hands of strangers. They happen inside family homes, carried out by the very people trusted to keep a child safe. And disturbingly, it is often those same caregivers who create images and videos of the abuse they commit. This is exactly what happened to Preston. For Preston's birth mother, hearing all of this in court was almost too much to process. She had given birth to her son while serving a prison sentence. She had already lost the chance to raise him herself. Preston was placed into care and eventually adopted because it was meant to give him something better: safety, love, and a stable home. Instead, she now had to sit in a courtroom and listen to details of how her son had been sexually abused by the very men who were supposed to protect him. No parent, whatever their own past, should ever have to hear something like this about their child. This part of the case reveals just how deep the abuse went in that household. It was not only about bruises that could be explained away, or fear disguised as parenting. This was calculated, repeated harm carried out in the very place Preston should have felt safest, his own home, by the two men chosen to be his fathers. And soon, this pattern of abuse would lead to the final, fatal day of Preston's short life. Just days before Preston died, there was another warning sign. Jamie Varley recorded video of Preston left alone in the bath for over 14 minutes. No adult was watching him. This footage would later become important because it showed a pattern that contradicted the story Varley was about to tell. Then came the day Preston died. Evidence presented in court suggests Preston was assaulted at least twice that day. The first assault caused internal injuries, including further sexual harm. The second assault, later that same day, caused Preston to stop breathing properly. At one point, Varley recorded Preston lying on a bed, struggling to breathe. This was about 90 minutes before Preston was finally taken to the hospital. Instead of calling for help immediately, Varley filmed him. Eventually, the two men brought Preston to Blackpool Victoria Hospital. CCTV cameras captured them arriving. The moment they walked through the doors, hospital staff rushed to help. Preston was in cardiac arrest. Medical teams worked as hard as they could to save him. But it was too late. Preston was pronounced dead. He was only 13 months old. What happened next, inside that hospital room, revealed something disturbing about Jamie Varley's character. In the final moments, when staff brought both men in to say goodbye to Preston, these moments should have been about the baby. Instead, according to those present, Varley made it about himself. He dropped to his knees. He wailed loudly. He cried out for his own mother. He kept repeating, "This is my fault," almost as if performing grief rather than feeling it. He then told hospital staff his version of events. He said he had left Preston in a secure baby bath seat for just a minute while he stepped out to get some clothes. He said that when he came back, Preston had somehow fallen from the seat and slipped under the water. He stuck to this story. In police interviews, he was firm and confident. He said, "I have never ever hurt my son.
I haven't done it, and I'll fight it to the day I die. You are absolutely wrong."
But the evidence told a very different story. When Preston arrived at the hospital, his body was completely dry. There were no signs at all that he had drowned. If his story were true, Preston's hair, skin, and clothing would have shown signs of water. They did not. A pathologist later determined that Preston's cause of death was airway obstruction. This means something blocked his ability to breathe, consistent with smothering or having something forced into his airway. This was not what happens when a baby slips under bathwater for a few seconds. And then there were the injuries, around 40 of them, found across Preston's small body. Some were old, already healing. Others were fresh, from that very day. Together, they told a story of repeated violence and abuse over time, not a single tragic accident. In court, this contrast became impossible to ignore. On one side stood Jamie Varley, calm and confident, insisting he had done nothing wrong. On the other side stood the silent evidence of Preston's own body, telling a truth that no words could deny. A baby cannot speak up for himself, but his injuries did the talking for him. And what they revealed contradicted everything Varley claimed, piece by piece, until his story completely fell apart. Preston's case went to trial, and from the very beginning, everyone involved understood how serious it was. Press interest was huge. Members of both men's families sat in the public gallery. Members of Preston's own family were also present. A pool of 60 potential jurors was brought in just to select the panel for this case. The trial did not go smoothly from the start. About 3 or 4 days in, problems arose with the jury, and the judge had to discharge them completely. This meant starting the entire process over again with a brand new jury, who then heard the full case from the beginning. After weeks of evidence, the jury reached their verdicts. Jamie Varley was found guilty of murder. He was also convicted of grievous bodily harm, child cruelty, sexual assault, and assault by penetration. On top of this, he was convicted of multiple counts of making and distributing indecent images and videos of Preston. John McGowan-Fazakerley was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. He was also convicted of child cruelty and joint sexual assault. The court found that he had turned a blind eye to what was happening in his own home, and failed to seek help for a baby who desperately needed it. When it came to sentencing, Jamie Varley received a whole life order. This means he will spend the rest of his life in prison. He will never be released. John McGowan-Fazakerley also received a lengthy prison sentence for his role in Preston's suffering and death. One court reporter, who had covered criminal trials for almost 20 years, said this was probably the worst case she had ever witnessed. Throughout the trial, jurors struggled to hide their sadness and disgust as evidence was presented. For Preston's birth family, sitting through each day of testimony was overwhelming. It's important to understand what these verdicts really represent. This was not a case about one bad decision or one moment of lost control. These were convictions built on months of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse carried out by two men who were supposed to be Preston's protectors. So, what can we take away from Preston's story? First, abuse is rarely a single event. In Preston's case, it was a pattern: hospital visits, unexplained bruises, a broken bone, sleepless nights filled with fear, and abuse hidden inside a home that looked perfect from the outside. Second, this case destroys the myth of the perfect dad. Jamie Varley was a teacher. John McGowan-Fazakerley held a respected, well-paid job. They looked stable, successful, and loving. But none of that guaranteed safety for the child in their care. Abusers can come from any background, any profession, any social class. Third, there were red flags along the way. Repeated injuries that didn't add up. Explanations that always sounded just reasonable enough. A baby who couldn't speak up for himself. If you ever notice a pattern like this around a child in your own life, report it. That single action could save a life. Finally, this case raises hard questions about the systems meant to protect children. Adoption checks, social workers, and medical staff all interacted with this family, yet the full picture was never connected in time. Agencies need better ways to share information and question explanations that don't quite fit. Preston was a child, wanted by many people throughout his short life: his birth family, his foster carers, and the adoption agency that placed him. But in the end, he was placed with two men who saw him not as a child to protect, but as someone to control and harm. Do you think this was mainly a failure of the system, or do you think these two men would have found a victim no matter what safeguards were in place? What would you change about adoption and child protection to help prevent another case like Preston's? Let me know in the comments below. If you want more deep dive, respectful true crime coverage like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear Preston's story.